It is very hard to be certain about anything surrounding the topic of hell. Like, where is it? Is it a real place? When was it created? Is it really a torturous place? How sure can I be that I'm not going there? Can people that go there get out? Hold it there. Having said all of that, there is one thing that most scholars are most certain about when it comes to the topic of hell, and it will very likely rock your world as it did mine. That is how and when the idea of hell got imported or inserted into the Bible. Imported? Inserted? What are you saying? Hasn't it always been in the Bible? Nope, it wasn't. Let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Octavio. Welcome to my channel. To give you some context, I graduated from Regent College with a Master's in Theological Studies in 2022. I mention this because it is through my studies that I realized how much the phrase scholarship is divided. Applies to everything and anything Bible or anything God. Christian scholars are divided when it comes to most things, like biblical authorship, translation of multiple texts, sources, salvation, and of course, hell. However, when biblical scholars read the Hebrew Scriptures or Old Testament carefully, surprisingly, most scholars come to the same conclusion. Hell is not and was never a part of the Old Testament at all. There is no trace of it. Its smell is not there. The idea surrounding hell never crossed the minds of Old Testament writers. When the Old Testament closes with Malachi, hell is not there. But when the New Testament opens with Matthew, hell is there. One moment, it's not there. The other, it's there. Granted, the moment between the closing of the Old Testament and the opening of the New Testament, that period called intertestamental period, lasts for at least 300 years. So what happened? How on earth did we get hell all of a sudden in the New Testament? I know what you're thinking. Are you sure? Are you really sure of what you're saying right now? And most importantly, what on earth does that mean for our current theology of the afterlife? Because after all, if heaven and hell are this paramount and fundamental eternal duality baked into the reality of the universe we know, why on earth did God stay silent about this for more than 5,000 years? Shouldn't hell have been right at the center of the Eden story? Why wasn't Adam told,
whenever you take from this fruit, you will surely die and go to hell, you and your generations with you?
Why do none of the Old Testament prophets know about hell? Why was hell hidden from Abraham, from Moses, the friend of God, from David, the man after God's own heart, from Solomon, the wisest and smartest character in the Old Testament? Isn't this the most basic and important piece of information to be passed on by God? And believe me, I will answer some of your questions in a moment. But there are still some things we need to discuss. As I mentioned before, in the 5,000 to 8,000 years that encompasses the Old Testament period, the Israelites had no concept of hell, only of a place called Sheol, where most of the people went when they died. Some theologians or biblical scholars would rather translate Sheol to grave or the place of the dead. Now, brace yourselves. To make things even more complicated, did you know that the Israelites in the Old Testament did not believe that souls are eternal? There is zero evidence to suggest that they believed that this was a quality of all humans, regardless of race or belief. For more than 5,000 years, there was no concept of the immortality of the soul.
I know.
So we could ask the same questions here. If souls are indeed immortal, or at least survive the grave, and this is a fundamental and paramount quality of all humans, why did God stay silent about this for more than 5,000 years? Why doesn't Solomon, the wisest and smartest guy in the Old Testament, know that souls are immortal, or that when somebody dies, their souls go somewhere? Isn't this a basic and very important piece of information to be passed on by God to his people, the Israelites? I know. I feel it too. It's weird. It just baffles me. Because at no point in the Hebrew Scriptures or Old Testament does God have a conversation with a prophet or somebody that went something like this.
Hear ye, Prophet Mike. There has been something very important that I've been hiding for 5,000 years, and it's time for you to know and communicate this to my people. There is a place called hell, where all of you have secretly been going. But given how horrible it is, I've decided to keep it from you. But now, it's time for all of you to know. Tell the Israelites that when they die, they actually don't go to a place called Sheol like you were told. They actually go to a place called hell, a place of fire and torment. I should have mentioned this earlier, I know. My bad.
Okay, finally, some answers. So hell and the idea of the immortality of the soul were not part of the Old Testament. When did they get inserted into the Bible, or when did these ideas invade Jewish thinking and Jewish theology? I actually hinted at the answer right at the beginning of the video. It happened in that intertestamental period, which means that this got inserted 300 to 400 years before the birth of Christ. It was a philosophical and theological development that happened during the intertestamental period due to Greco-Roman influences on Judaism and later on the church for centuries to come. Some would even call this a period of syncretism between Jewish thought or theology and Greek philosophy, a period of amalgamation of both cultures and schools of thought. Syncretism in the Bible? Yes, I know. I was absolutely flabbergasted when I learned this. I didn't even know what to do with the Bible at that point. Now, let me be clear. Many scholars would never use the word syncretism to describe this period due to its negative connotations. But no matter how you dice it or how you describe it, this is historically true. This happened. The reality is that Greek philosophy became such a problem and it represented such a threat for Jewish identity back then that a very prominent and important place was created. A prominent place that we find all over the New Testament that is nowhere to be found in the Old Testament. This place is the synagogue. This was the Jewish response to the threat that was Greek philosophy. It was a place to sort of recatechize the Jews. Because let me remind you, the Hebrew scriptures or Old Testament canon wasn't closed back then. That happened hundreds of years after Jesus' death. But I won't go into that because that's going to be a conversation for a different video. I know that the reality that Greek thought and Jewish theology had this sort of romance or dance is sort of disoriented. But stay with me. I'll give you another very well-known example of this. Remember one of the most beloved chapters in all of the New Testament? I'm talking about the first chapter of the Gospel of John. This chapter introduces a very important, interesting word that is nowhere to be found in the Old Testament, mainly because it's a Greek word. Is that famous word logos. In the beginning was the logos, and the logos was with God, and the logos was God. Logos is not just a Greek word that in English means word. The word logos is part of a Greek philosophical concept that the author of the Gospel of John uses to refer to Jesus. The concept of the logos is multifaceted, and it originated within Greek philosophy centuries before the Gospel of John was even written. The logos is a principle that refers to a universal divine reason implicit in the cosmos, immanent in nature, ordering it and giving it form and meaning. Now, no scholar ever will be sure about the author's intent when he used the word logos to describe Jesus. We don't know how far the comparison or link to the Greek logos goes, but it is there, front and center, inserted in a very poetic way. And you will find Greek philosophy or allusions to Greek philosophy in other parts of the New Testament too. I know that this, which is a historical fact, this actually happened, and this might be creating conflicts in your head between our ideas that the Bible is God-breathed or inspired by God. And to that I would say, that is a wonderful and very fruitful conflict to have. And you don't need to rush and try to solve it immediately in your head or your heart or your faith. I actually invite you to come back to this channel as we try to tackle those conflicts together. Leave me your questions, leave me your frustrations, leave all of those here in the comments. Let's have interesting conversations there. So what on earth do you want us to do with all this information? I also didn't know what to do at first. I hope you sit with it for a while and think about it, remembering that God is not out to get you. God is not out there to get you for thinking different thoughts, for asking difficult questions. So do that exactly. Ask tough questions. If you leave with anything, something from this video may be this. Our theological and philosophical ideas of the afterlife are a lot more complex and convoluted than you and I were ever told. So this is what I'm advocating for. Humility when we talk about these topics. Tons and tons of humility. Whenever you talk about hell, whenever you talk about heaven, whenever you talk about death, there is so much we don't know about the afterlife, about the spiritual world. And the little that we know should ignite tons and tons of humility in our hearts. Not only when we talk with atheists or agnostics, but especially when we talk with other Christians from different denominations, from different beliefs, different backgrounds. And let me add one very important last thing that might bring you comfort. Just because some ideas are of Greek origin, that doesn't make them necessarily wrong, bad, or evil, as some people might suggest. Because after all, any truth is God's truth. If something is true, it is true, no matter who discovers it, no matter who comes up with it. So if indeed hell exists and souls are indeed eternal, then that's reality. It is what it is, no matter who wrote about it first. The topic of hell is very complex, and there are some things we can't say about hell and some things we shouldn't be saying about hell at all. And for that, I made this very important video that you should watch next. So see you over there.